No, it's definitely a show of solidarity with the message being sent by Theresa May yesterday. You know, you had a few countries, including France, initially sort of having a standoffish response. Very initially, the U.S., until Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador to the U.S., used very strong language mentioning Russia and pointing the finger at Russia specifically at the UN Security Council. What this statement really does is it's if you want to like broad brushstroke define it, it's basically France, U.S., and Germany and the U.K. all saying we're fed up with what we regard as a behavior over the recent years of aggressive Russian behavior, a pattern they see emerging. They say they abhor this latest attack, and they basically say that there is no, as they see it, according to all the intelligence, there is no plausible explanation at this time other than Russia's involvement in the attack. They call this an assault on UK sovereignty, and they also say explicitly that they point out this would be the first use of a military-style nerve agent on European soil since World War II. They're calling on Russia basically to come clean, answer questions that everyone still has relating to this attack in Salisbury, and to provide what they would say is full and complete disclosure of this so-called Novichok program, a program which is believed to have been a Soviet-era program in the 1970s and 80s of chemical weapons, and actually more specifically a program these agents were supposed to be able to contravene, to sort of go around international treaties through using new and sort of then, I guess, advanced methods to create a new agent. They say this is a breach of international law. It's a strong statement. That said, they don't concretely offer any measures beyond what Theresa May has already said yesterday. The expulsion of the diplomats, the freezing of Russian assets, the freezing, suspending of high-level bilateral contacts between the UK and Russia. And I'll just add that the statements by UK, US, France, and Germany was echoed very strongly by the NATO Secretary General, Mr. Stoltenberg, earlier when he also spoke of a pattern of reckless Russian behavior in recent years. He said that he backed a proportionate British response, saying this attack must have consequences. However, for the time being, he says NATO is only going to offer political support. It's not going to so-called invoke its Clause 5, which means an attack against one is an attack against all. That's only been invoked once after the September 11th attacks in the United States. So measured words from the Secretary General, but very clearly throwing himself four square behind Theresa May, as we saw in the statement of the four powers in Europe.
Meanwhile, though, in Moscow, the Kremlin here really remaining defiant, saying that they weren't involved.
Yeah, this is really a case of parallel universes, two very separate bubbles and narratives, depending which one you're in. If you are right now in Russia, in that narrative, been watching a lot of sort of the state news, reading the Russian statements, Russian press agencies, they see this as a provocation, as political theater, as an attempt, essentially a thinly veiled attempt by Theresa May to distract attention from Brexit. They see this entire thing as a trumped-up, sort of orchestrated political theater, if you will, because Theresa May is right now in very troubled, difficult Brexit negotiations. She's under a lot of fire. Her government's weak. There's been talk that she could even fall herself by a revolt within her own party and beyond. So get attention off. Put it on something else, trump up these charges. They call the charges against Russia nonsense. But that said, like I said, going back to this, the Russians have not we have seen this exact pattern before from Russia. Absolute denial. And one of the reasons that earlier statement from UK, US, France, and Germany has the wording, that strong wording, is when I said they're fed up with they say they've seen this in the Donbass and eastern Ukraine before. These denials, they've seen it in Crimea. They've seen it with the downing of that Malaysian passenger jet in 2014 over eastern Ukraine. They might have even seen it in Russian meddling with the U.S. Election. This sort of overt, covert, almost hybrid type of propagandistic warfare. By the time you rally your forces to react against it, the facts are already there on the ground. It's done. You can't really do anything. And from the Western perspective, it looks like Putin's already won, and what can you do? And that's really the question everyone's facing right now. Can you make Russia back down? And the easy answer, perhaps, to that question is perhaps not. The Russians have a high pain threshold, and they do not apologize. They will not admit they're wrong. And in this case especially, they are going to remain defiant, if you were to ask me.